What have you done? That's not a fair question. He has asked a question that draws them out of their ballpark right onto his ballpark. And there is no other answer. He won't play by their rules. You see it? It's a real sharp question. It drives them either to absolute frustration or to admit that they are not speaking for God anymore when they say, don't you talk about Jesus anymore. Now, where did Peter get the gusto to talk right to the leaders of Jerusalem who have the power to put him in jail and say, now you tell us, do we listen to you or God? You or God? Where did he get that? Very simple. He'd been with Jesus. He knew that Jesus was alive. He'd seen Him. Jesus was alive. Jesus was the Lord of the universe. Jesus had told them to pray and preach. And therefore, if somebody comes along and says, don't preach anymore, Peter knows it's not God. And he can ask them, all right, you tell me, God or you? They had been with Jesus. Now, the lesson here is, don't feel like you have to play by the rules of the world when you converse with them. When the opportunity presents itself to stand up in public and speak what Jesus once spoken, you stand up and speak what Jesus once spoken, even if the response will be, what are you trying to do? Dump your old religious assumptions on everybody else? Who do you think you are? We don't even buy your basic assumptions. Well, they didn't, of course. Because Peter's assumption was, God is speaking and you're speaking. We choose God, not you. You're not on God's side. That's his assumption. And of course, they don't buy it. And he didn't care if they bought it. He spoke the truth and he said, we must speak what we have seen and heard. And that was the end of the conversation. They were out. Of course, they got arrested again and beaten the next time. Now, I want to apply these three things to us and our situation today. Take them one at a time. Go back to the beginning. And state them in terms of lessons for us today. Lesson number 1. In order to be bold and forthright and clear and courageous in speaking what Jesus once spoken in public, you do not have to have advanced education or specialized training in rhetoric or logic. You get that now? Is the lesson clear? In order to speak with courage, boldness, clarity, and forthrightness, without any kind of fog or haze that covers ambiguity, you do not have to have an advanced education. You do not have to have specialized training. One of the great advantages that I have in having followed my educational career as far as it can go in my field and reading journals every month by people who write out of that advanced education is that I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is no positive correlation between advanced education and courageous clarity. Zero correlation. I'm tempted to say, I'm going to qualify this in a minute, so I will go ahead and say it. There is a very high probability that if you follow education all the way through to the PhD, you will learn to speak in a way that very few can understand. There is very little correlation between advanced education and courage. Graduate schools don't make people courageous. And clarity. Graduate schools do not teach how to communicate with ordinary people with clarity. Now, here's the qualification. A very important parenthesis. I believe in education. If I had my life to live over again, I would live it exactly the way I lived it and go to school for 28 years. Well, 22 if you subtract the first 6. And I believe that in this church, we should encourage our brightest young people to make a career of scholarship. Was that clear? Close parenthesis. Nevertheless, let us get out of our minds the notion that in order to be courageous, in order to be clear and forthright, you've got to go to school another few years. You know where courage comes from? It comes from being with Jesus. It comes from knowing Jesus. So that you know that you know that you know that you know that He's alive and that this is His will. And you know where clarity comes from? Forthright, unambiguous, no runaround, no fog clarity. It comes from goodness, good-heartedness that has nothing to hide. Doesn't need to create a fog of jargon in order to slip in some notion that people might not otherwise want to think about. And where do you become good like that? With Jesus. Jesus was good like that. You remember what His enemies said to Him? We know that you are true and care for no man. You know what they meant, care for no man? You don't give a hoot what people think about what you say, do you? And Jesus kind of smiles and says, I care what my Father says, but I don't care what you say. Truth is what matters. That's point number one. Namely, there is no positive correlation between advanced education and courageous clarity, which means, lest you haven't felt it yet, you have no excuse not to stand up in the public square and say, this is what Jesus says, this is what all people of every religion, race, color, ethnic background should do. I commend it to you for your serious consideration, and be seated. And let them laugh, and let them twitter, and let them beat you if they will. But there's no excuse, for it does not require anything that is not available to any of you, namely, time with Jesus. The second lesson is that when you do that, you will find increasingly, today as well as then, that people who benefit from wrongdoing and wrong thinking turn a deaf ear and a blind eye to mounting evidence for truth and right. In fact, every one of you knows this is not just a problem out there in the world. This is a problem right here. Because every one of us uses our brain to defend our heart. So if the heart wants just a little sex, the brain can manage that. I mean, it can come up with a good rationalization. Or if the stomach wants another helping, the brain can handle that. Even though we know it's not healthy for us, the brain can work that out for us. It can clear the way. The brain is a remarkably wonderful liar to the heart. It can defend anything the heart wants badly enough. And that's true. There is no such thing as complete objectivity anywhere in the world. Our minds run happily, willy-nilly along the leash of the heart, which is why hearts must be changed and why prayer is on the front burner for this year. We can talk till we're blue in the face to abortionists. I took one of the abortionists from the Midwest Center out to lunch twice, and I looked him in the face with just absolute flabbergasting at what he was willing to concede. I'll tell you more about that down there at 1 o'clock. But I knew that my words were like BBs against this man's boxcar blindness. Suppose the pictures of mutilated babies threatens your desire for abortion on demand. You know what your mind will do? I'll just tell you what it does, because I've talked to them. I've been talked to in jail. I've been talked to in abortion clinics. I've been talked to over lunch. I've been talked to at the university. And this is what the mind says.